So in the previous lectures, we've been looking at uh, interest from the perspective essentially of the lender. Right? That's really what you've been doing with the kinds of investments, the compound interest and the annuities. You are loaning money to the bank, and in exchange, they are paying you interest. Well, now we're going to look at it from the other perspective. Now we're going to look at it from the perspective of the borrower. Right? So we're going to start our discussion here with what are called open lines of credit. Right? These come in a number of different varieties. The most common one, a lot of you may be familiar with, are credit cards. Some business loans fit into this category, and what are called lines of credit obviously fit into this category. These are all accounts where the balance can change, right? So in that sense, they're a little closer to an annuity, but where with an annuity, the balance changes in a kind of clockwork way, right? You put money in at the beginning of every month or the end of every month. Well, these open lines of credit is much more variable, right? If you've got a credit card, you can use it any day, right? You can use it multiple times a day, right? So now we're kind of at the far end of variability in terms of the principal, if you will, or in the case of loans, we usually think of it as the account's balance. Well, what we want to do is we want to be able to calculate what interest you owe at the end of the month. Right? We have a couple of methods of doing that. The first one is this thing is called the Unpaid Balance Method. Right? And I've got a scenario here. You can pause if you need to. Take a minute to read through this. We have a credit card, and you're earning 15% interest. And you can see if you read through this, a number of things happen. You make purchases, you make payments at various times. And what I want to know is, what is your new balance at the end of the month, including any interest that you owe? Right? And the way we're going to do this, it's using this formula, and I know it looks kind of big, but if you stop for a minute and break it down, it really, I think, kind of makes a lot of sense. We start with the old balance. That is your balance on the first of the month, right? Your starting balance. We're going to calculate interest on that balance using the simple interest method. Then we're going to add new purchases, and we're going to subtract out returns and payments. Okay, so let's see if we can walk through this then using my scenario here, right? The P old, that is your initial balance, your balance on the first of the month. And we see here we have an unpaid balance of $200 at the beginning of the month. So that's 200 plus, and the interest is for what it's worth, the most calculation-oriented part. So I'm actually going to let's just hold on to that and look at the other pieces here for a minute. Purchases made. You made a $200 purchase here, and on the 10th of the month, and a $150 purchase here, and that's it. So there was a total of $350 worth of purchases. There were no returns, and you made a $400 payment. Okay, so how do we do the interest? Well, interest, this is going to be a simple interest situation. All right, so now there's a couple of different ways you can do this, and you kind of have to look at the question. If the question tells you what month it is, this is actually what we're going to see a little later. If the question tells you what month it is, then you know the number of days in the month, right? And you would use that to do the interest calculation. Here, I wasn't told what month it is, so I don't know how many days we're talking about. So I'm going to do this on a monthly basis, right? So you remember what simple interest looks like. Interest equals principal times rate times time. All right, so the principal is that previous balance, it's $200. The rate is the 15%, so that's times 0.15, and the time is 1 month. Now remember, we're always focused on consistency with our times. That 0.15 was an annual interest rate. All right, so I have to put this time value in years. Well, we're doing 1 month, and there's 12 months in a year. So 1 month is 1/12 of a year, right? And now this comes down to just going to your calculator, right, and adding up all of these numbers on this line here. And if you do that, we end up with $152.50 as our future balance, right? That's how much you're going to owe. Excuse me. That's what will be the balance of your account at the end of the month, right? Taking into account all of the purchases you made, all of the payments that you made, and the money that you owed in interest. So I've got a second example here, and it's a little different on its face. This isn't a credit card. This is a student loan, but the principles are the same, right? We can use this same formula to do this calculation. So let's kind of walk through it here. You're just at the beginning. You're making your very first payment. So you have $35 in loans. We're talking about a 6% annual interest rate. And you're going to pay $800 per month towards this loan. So what I want to know is, after your first payment, what is your new balance? All right, well, let's see how we can do this, right? The initial balance at the beginning of the month is $35,000 plus interest. Okay, that's principal times rate times time. So that's $35,000 times your interest rate. That's 0.06 times, and we weren't given a month here, so I'm going to do this monthly and call this 1/12. Plus, we didn't make any purchases. You're done. You graduated, so that the balance didn't go up at all. Minus, there were no returns, and you did make an $800 payment. Right, so now we go to our calculator, and your new balance at the beginning of the second month is $34,375. Now, I'd like you to think about that for just a minute. Okay, how much did your balance change? Well, it went from $35,000 down to $34,375. That is a change of $625. Okay, so you made an $800 payment, and it reduced your principal by $625. $175 went to interest. And that's what we're seeing here. Okay, now there's a problem with this method. Right? There's a problem here. Remember what interest is. Somebody is giving you their money and letting you use it for a certain amount of time. And in exchange, you're going to pay them to do this, just like you would pay someone to do anything else for you. Right? Well, here's the problem. Think back to our initial example, to that credit card example. If you make your payment on the first of the month, that unpaid balance method doesn't recognize that. Right? You're going to owe the same amount in interest if you make the payment on the beginning of the month versus the end of the month. And that kind of violates our idea of you're paying based on the time that the lender doesn't have access to that money, doesn't have access to that resource. Right? So we would really like to have a method that's a little more fine-tuned, right? That actually kind of drills down and looks at when these events are happening and takes that into account. Well, there is a method that does this. And that's what we're going to look at in the next lecture. We're going to talk about something called the average daily balance method.